Chaos is a Friend of Mine is a new book by Ewan MacKenna, and the subtitle is The Life and Crimes of Conor McGregor. I'm delighted to say Ewan is here with us in the studio. How are you doing?
Pleasure, Jar. Very good.
You've obviously been working on this for about 18 months, 2 years, is that right?
18 months, I'd say, yeah, roughly.
When was the decision to use McGregor as a mirror to Ireland, the idea, or when did that come about?
Well, the publisher came to me about 2 years ago, because I'd obviously written quite a few columns about McGregor's rise and I suppose his moralistic fall, and they suggested a kind of biography. And the more I delved into him, I didn't think a simple biography did him justice, because I think he's bigger than just an MMA star. I thought he was a representation of a very imperfect time and place in society, and a societal collapse and all of these things. So I wanted to use him as a projection of so much going on around him.
Specific to Ireland or just general?
No, in general. I mean, I would have thought a right-wing shift. Obviously, you know, I lived in Brazil, and you've Bolsonaro there, you've Trump in America, you've Erdogan in Turkey, you've Duterte in the Philippines, and even in Ireland we see last week with the by-elections. I mean, there's these right-wingers popping up, and it's growing, and he kind of fitted into that strongman, angry, nationalistic, thuggish loudmouth that they love. And I don't think that's where he started out. I think he would have been anything people wanted him to be, so long as they paid for it, and that's what they created. You
talked about him being Play-Doh in our hands, and in everybody's hands, really. But how much of this do you put down to his own creation? How much of it is actually something that was created by him as opposed to the forces around him?
There's a bit of that. I mean, I guess it would have started when he saw there was an opportunity. I interviewed him in 2013 after his first UFC win, and I met him in a car park in McDonald's on the Long Mile Road. And he was roguish back then, but he was a nice fella, interesting fella, wanted to talk about the philosophy of fighting, the history of fighting, all these different arts around the world in terms of fighting. And then he called his girlfriend for a lift home because he didn't fancy the 2 mile walk, didn't have a bean really at that stage. And he was roguish, and he knew how to play the game. I mean, he was quite clever, but around that time he went on the Late Late Show. And having interviewed him, I remember him going on, and I thought they could have gone so many interesting ways in that interview.
Who was?
Ryan Tubridy.
Right, okay.
And it was kind of a clown act, and he kind of, you're like an Ali from Dublin, and he'd say something funny and the crowd would cheer, and it was kind of cheap and easy, and McGregor could see that was working. And I think he decided to go down that line. And it made him a lot of money, but I think it got out of control. I mean, it was fine to a point. But then when you get a guy, I suppose, when you look at his decline, when you're calling a German of Russian origin a Nazi, when you're saying dance for me boy to black people, and everyone around you is saying, that's fine, you're making money out of it, therefore it's okay. I think that can take over. I mean, I was talking to one person in his camp, and they said 3 or 4 years ago, they were in Las Vegas before a fight, and he kicked down the door of the sitting room in his boxers at 3 o'clock in the day and came in shouting, I'm the champion, I'm the greatest, I'm the champion. Just out of control, ego. And I guess with him, it's interesting because it's very unfair it's too simple, I think, to say. Like at the beginning, everyone, if I was saying this wouldn't end well, people were, you're just a begrudger, you're just negative. And a lot of those same people have flipped, and when I say now it's deeper than just you're calling the guy a scumbag, you're saying that's too simple. There's cause and effect to this.
Go on. So give us those deeper layers. Why is it too simple? What are the other forces at work that you're actually talking about?
Well, I wanted to delve into in this era because I suppose in terms of celebrity, there were no major studies. I remember talking to Wright Thompson of ESPN about this before the book, and he said in the world of social media there have been no major or detailed studies or delving into the idea of what it's like to be a celebrity in a world of Twitter and Facebook and all these things where you create someone and you have to keep being them. And that was fine. That always existed to an extent through magazine interviews or TV, but that was for an hour here or an hour there. Whereas now if you're a celebrity, it's constant access and you have to keep constantly being that person. And the person McGregor chose to be was right on the edge, out of control, crazy, to the point that his salvation was actually getting in a cage fighting, and it was away from that it was problematic. And it was like he held up a mask, and one day he took it down and there was nothing left behind it. And to constantly 24/7 for your customers, for your audience, to be this lunatic, to be this outrageous guy, to be abusive, to be arrogant, to do that 24/7, you eventually become that.
You mentioned Wright Thompson there. He had a very negative response to the piece that he wrote in ESPN, and I don't know if that's where the idea of having him write the prologue to the book comes from, but he actually addresses that and how it shook him quite a little bit. So if people remember the piece, he wrote about Crumlin, and basically it was a ghetto.
He said, I think one line, and it was changed by an editor, and he got a lot of abuse for it, was that men bringing their dates home couldn't go all the way to wherever, be it Trimna, they had to change buses and go a different way, and it made it out like it was kind of Compton in the 80s or something like this. And it was changed, but a lot of people, that was a really good article in many ways. That line, no. That paragraph, no. But the rest of that article, which was 3,000-4,000 words long, nailed it. And people just wanted something to be outraged by, and that's a silly line. And they missed the rest of it, which was kind of Crumlin to Crumlin with a fairy tale in between. And it looked at the factors, it kind of started delving into the factors that shape someone and how we build them up and how we break them down in this era. And nobody got that. Everybody just wanted to look at this one line of outrage, which was kind of a Twitter line almost that people could give out about.
So were you pushing an open door when you talked to him about asking him to write the prologue for this?
Yeah, he was, and lovely guy. I have to say, I mean, I've always been a big fan of writing, but it was he's really humble and quite shy. And then he sent the foreword to the book, and he was, is that okay? You can change what you want. And it was quite weird to see someone who's so good be almost so insecure about their own writing.
The stuff that he addresses in that is the importance of like veracity, and how he wanted that to be the case. And I guess it's kind of the perfect thing for the precursor to a book where you are about to talk about Irish life and Irish society. What are your conclusions about, when you dive into that? So we don't have that many of these celebrities really in our midst. We have very few. There's probably about 5 or 6 maybe, and then a bunch of others who maybe I'm too old to know about. What are your conclusions when you come to that, or what are the causes and the effects of this?
Well, it's very unhealthy. I mean, it's not natural to be that guy. I interviewed a guy called Dave Hill, who he fought at the beginning when he was still in Cage Warriors, way back before the UFC years. And Dave was talking to me about how, like, a lot of fighters would talk themselves up, and he could tell that it was bullshit, basically, that they're just trying to build it up. They're just trying to build up their own ego and make themselves believe. And then he met him on stage, and McGregor goes at him, and he's shoving his face into him, and he's pushing him. And he realised at that moment, he said, this guy is actually unhinged. And you take a guy like that, who's kind of that way around fighting, and then he realises that can sell if he's like that all the time. And I suppose to answer your question, the whole effect of it, it's really not healthy. I mean, it's the kind of the Greek tragedy of building someone up and up and up, and then when we get bored of that story, you can't be outrageous forever, because if everything's outrageous, nothing's outrageous. Then you break them back down, and you want the fallen hero at the end of it, and it's quite grim. And it's a kind of a story we've seen in boxing over and over again, but it's just accelerated and kind of enhanced in this era. Yeah, the accelerated culture of the now. Why do we as a country do it? Why did we fall prey to the charms of McGregor at that point? Idiocy. I mean, I know that might sound harsh, but when you look back at some of McGregor's interviews and you look back at the reaction to them, and there was this idea that he was, like, he should be on a coin. Remember that petition that went to the Oireachtas? I don't remember that petition. Yeah, it was debated in the Oireachtas, because a petition went in with, I think, 100,000 signatures that he should be on a coin. He was on the Late Late 4 or 5 times. He was seemingly this hilarious character. He was all these things. And you look back, he wasn't funny. I can see the Late Late, right? Because, you're a producer, you want to book a guest who's very famous and who you probably can't get that often, so you take him whenever you can get him, and then, that... It is lowest common denominator, though, because he brings in an audience, so we bring him on more, so his audience get bigger, and it's a race to the bottom. They have people on who talk about angels, who are like, tarot card, basically. They'll have anybody on who they think is going to fill a slot for them. So, I don't... But it's the level of support that he had at such a deep and indoctrinated level of supporter. Well, there's an anger, I would suggest, out there, and we've seen it. We've had it in America, we've had it in the UK, and kind of their culture drips down, and we eventually get it here, and we're seeing that with our politics, with Noel Grealish and Verona Murphy and all these people. There's an anger, and when people are angry, I guess, they look for things to blame, and they look for things to cling to. And it's often the wrong things. And with McGregor, it's like, that guy is angry. He's shouting. He's showing us how we can behave. He's kind of pointing out, you're this, you're that, you're that. And it's an easy thing to cling to when you're angry. And he was kind of the perfect guy for the time and place in that regard. And I think a lot of people bought into that. Is that gone?
Is that core support gone, or is it, because it doesn't seem? It seems like if you think back to like the heyday of Ricky Hatton, and in Vegas the big thing was that it was an extension of cricket's Barmy Army. It was boxing's version of that. There was a little bit of that for a few fights. Certainly one of the summer ones where it felt like a lot of J1ers had gone to Vegas for the fight. That seems to have dwindled quite significantly, or is it still there? I don't know. It's supposed to be find out in January.
There's always a hardcore that have been there since the beginning. I think for two reasons it's probably dwindled. One, I think the Mayweather fight was the end of his MMA career in a way, in that he got all this money, the hunger goes. It's not a natural thing to want to get into a cage and kind of choke someone's air supply or have yours when you don't have the money.
So I'm not talking so much about this. I suppose I misframed my question. Are the angry people just going somewhere else?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're still there. You can say, well, they're going into politics. You look at they're going in everywhere. Racist abuse is up. Peter Casey in the last presidential election goes from 2% to 23% because he has a go at travellers. We see Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael last week running in the by-elections. Candidates have said outrageous things. Yeah, they're just going to other places and they're becoming hardened and entrenched. And something else will come along that will catch their eye and they'll use that vehicle next.
Case, as a friend of mine, is a Bob Dylan quote, right?
Yeah.
Why pick that? Who was that? Has he said that? Is that something?
No, I just always liked it, and I thought it kind of suited him because his life has been chaotic. And as I said to you, I mean, I think when your salvation is cage fighting, I mean, when that's your normality and when you're in trouble away from that, it's quite a weird thing to find your salvation, and it's not a healthy thing, I guess.
Has somebody replaced him in Irish society? Will somebody replace him in Irish society in that role of the totemic figure that a certain generation of young Irishmen see as this weird, perfect embodiment of, you know...
He may be once in a generation, the kind of Roy Keane style thing, you know. I mean, it's very hard. He was the first to do it. We've never seen anything like that in Ireland. We may never have had a sports person that big in terms of America, ever.
What's the Keane comparison?
Well, someone to cling to. I mean, there was a generation of Irish people who loved Roy Keane for a very different reason. This kind of, this is the new Ireland. This guy is taking no crap on the football field. McGregor kind of embodied something a little bit after that. Further confidence, again, outspoken, loudmouthed, brash. And that kind of suited. It was kind of the post-Celtic Tiger era. This was the Celtic Tiger generation. We're Ireland, we're here.
Yeah, it's not really... It turns out we're not very good at that, I would say.
No, and I mean, we keep talking about how we need to be more confident, and it's kind of got to the stage when you're being Irish abroad, like even out for the Khabib fight in Vegas, when the McGregor fans started arriving out, the journalists who were Irish kind of started hiding their passports, because we didn't want to be associated or recognised, and we have this perception of Irishness abroad that everyone loves us, where we're actually... I mean, you're kind of stepping away from a lot of Irish people at this stage.
Yeah, certainly. There's been those places. The Australians were not that keen on, especially the J1ers and the ones on holiday. What was the behaviour around the Khabib fight in particular that kind of made you just take a step back and go, this isn't right?
Well, there was the riot after. I mean, the build-up, okay, there was fights and scuffles between men and women at the weigh-in. There was this kind of just up and down the Vegas Strip, there was "fuck the Jemison brothers" ringing out, which was McGregor's quote all the time, and just this kind of ego all the time. And after the fight, obviously the riots break out, and I remember in the lobby there was a young fella who spat at a Dagestani guy, and your man threw a punch and just knocked him out, and his jaw went like that. And I was kind of, people saw that, it's incredible, get a video of that, all this, and I was kind of thinking, can you imagine that guy? He's probably in America for a weekend with no health insurance. He's going to wake up tomorrow with a 20 grand medical bill and he's going to be ringing home for this. And even outside of that, the papaka, I think it's called, the white hats that Khabib wears from his part of the world, all his fans were wearing them. And they were surrounded by police. And there was all these young, angry Irish fellas trying to get at them and saying, the police are there to protect you, blah, blah, blah. It was completely the opposite. The police were there to protect all these Irish thugs.
Why? What was there, like, it's so alien, right? It's like, it's not really... We didn't ever have a proper hooligan culture in any of our sports. What were they trying to do?
It's a mimicking of McGregor. And I suppose MMA does fit into that. It didn't help that Khabib's team jumped in the ring. And
you talked about the mask and there being nothing behind it. Ultimately, was that not just all part of the plan to get rich? Was that not all just part of the plan to mobilise a bunch of people who would be your acolytes, who would create the atmosphere, who would mean that the events become better? So
I think initially... but that can go too far. I mean, what's the balance between having some semblance of sanity and 50 million in the bank, or having $500 million in the bank and being completely out of control? I think initially it was a plan that worked, but Paddy Houlihan, I think his book is out at the minute. I heard him talking last week, and he was talking about kind of John Kavanagh and McGregor and the straight blast gym, and how for 3 or 4 years this thing was just at full speed, and no one ever stopped for a minute at any point and said, let's reevaluate, where we go next, and it just became out of control. And that was McGregor too. Yeah.
So in terms of the actual sport, where do you think it stands now? Because, you know, there are young fighters coming through who definitely see that career path, but you would hope at some point too are thinking, okay, I see that the Paddy Houlihan point. Does the sport have a future in Ireland, do you think?
To a point. I mean, when you have someone as big as McGregor that comes along, and yet behind it, how big is MMA in Ireland, really? It's not. I mean, and it's never really grown outside Brazil, America. You know, one star Khabib will grow it slightly.
Yeah.
It's limited. It really is limited. And without McGregor, I mean, guys might make a living from it. Guys might win at it. But, I mean, fundamentally, it's never going to be mainstream, I don't think.
Any conclusions about where Ireland is going from now, as opposed to him specifically, but more about the country?
To a bad place. I mean, walking around Dublin when I come home troubles me greatly every time. Coming in here, walking over more and more homeless people, walking into pubs where the pints are more expensive and people are having a great time and salaries for some are going up, and it's not good. I mean, it's a really divided society.
That's what the book is about, really, isn't it?
Well, it's him as a reflection of that society, yeah, and money being everything above morals, and what this society does to people, and how we're shaping society, and it's him as a mirror of all of that.
And what stops that ever?
I think we're in terminal decline. People keep saying, and it's an arrogance of humans. I mean, George Carlin has a great quote about kind of people saying, save the planet, save the planet. He says the planet will be fine, it's us who are in big trouble. And I think fundamentally that's where we're headed, and people will go, that's negative. But I think there's an arrogance that we can somehow flick a switch and get out of a society in a bad shape.
Yeah, no, I mean, so if it wasn't to flick a switch, if there were things that we could begin, if there were conversations we could begin to have, what should they be?
I think we need to question things more. I don't think we question things enough. I think too much is just taken with a shrug of the shoulders, and that's the way it is. I think marketing and media tell people how to think so much that they don't question it enough.
Do people not really have their own ability to watch stuff and go, I don't agree with that?
There's a laziness. It's kind of like the Wall-E spaceship, where you kind of get a choice between a red and a blue jumper, and you're quite happy with that. People are not questioning stuff. They're going for the easy option. That's why all light entertainment is taking over. It's why reality TV is taking over, because people don't want to question things. People don't want the hard stuff.
See, you say that, though, but like, there's never been better TV made than there is now. If you watch the quality of work that goes into Succession, I haven't seen the latest Scorsese flick yet, but it's 3.5 hours long. Mm-hmm. It's demanding people's attention. Box sets are actually asking you to delve into something and commit hundreds of hours to watching it. The OJ documentary is a piece of art.
But it's amidst so much other stuff. I mean, it's just, there's so much being produced.
Does that not give you hope that this good stuff is actually out there? And if you go looking for it, and if you're willing to flick the TV off, that actually, it's pretty easy for you not to watch any reality TV. It's pretty easy for you now to find a tribe of people who will sit and communicate with you. And the means to communicate and to build communities around good quality work is actually, it's right there for all of us.
Well, put it this way, the guy I interviewed for the book, he's a professor in Emory University in Atlanta, in Georgia, or just outside Atlanta, and he wrote a book 10 years ago called The Dumbest Generation. And he looked at how SAT scores in America, reading levels, critical thought, all these things had fallen. And I interviewed him last year, and he said it's 11 years since the book, Ewan, and I thought we'd reached a low ebb then. And statistically in America, we've fallen through the floor since that point. You see it in Ireland with kind of leaving in junior cert papers. Rather than kind of let people get lesser scores, they're lessening the quality of the papers they're doing. And I mean, it's statistically, it's a decline. And Richard Dawkins, remember being in the late in the early 2000s, someone in the audience asked him, do you know, evolution, where's it going to take us? Are we going to grow wings, like this sort of thing? And he said, no, we're in a phase of devolution we may never come out of.
Yeah, look, I get that. I mean, but I don't think academic results, maybe we've got a little bit smarter about analysing life and saying that academic results isn't the be-all and end of it.
But have we, though? Look around. I mean, when I say most people are idiots, people go, oh, how can you say that? And I say, look around. this is what we're creating. We're creating a more divided society, a more angry society, where more people can't afford homes, where all these things. That's not a sign of intelligence. And people, that's the government. We elect them. And this is kind of a representation of our thought. McGregor is a representation of our thought.
So you think this is all ultimately we're going to get the world we deserve, right? Like we get the politicians we deserve, is the old aphorism, and that's truth. And that ultimately that the direction that we're going because of the choices we make is going to kill ourselves.
I do, I think, and it's exponential at this point. I mean, I think each decision we're making gives us less chance of coming out of this slide. I wouldn't have a 2-year-old nephew now. I know you've a kid. I wouldn't like to be growing up right now in Ireland. Or in a lot of countries, and I'd worry, I mean, it's a lot tougher now, and it's not a great place.
It's funny, I probably would have thought that, but then you have kids and you start to see the world slightly differently, a little bit through their eyes, and actually, it's not that bad phones, for example, there's a move to reject phones, which is, I think, about to take off in quite a serious way, where we might end up having phones the same way we think of smartphones, the way we think of cigarettes. You've got to be 16, you've got to be 18 or whatever. I think that there are things that we can do collectively if we sit down and go, why are we giving people access to the worst forms of whatever's available on the internet at the age of 12 and saying that's fine, you're okay to deal with that when their brains aren't fully formed? There is a way back, I would say, from all of this, if we actually start to have conversations.
I do, but I think I agree. But I think there's a chunk of society that's being forgotten about out there below those conversations that aren't being given those choices. I look at the sports grants, for example, that were handed out again, and we look at golf and tennis clubs. And I know you can't pigeonhole people by class directly into sport, but when private golf clubs are getting more and boxing clubs aren't getting anything. Back in 2011, I did a series of stories for the Irish Examiner about sport on the fringes of society, and I went to Neilstown Boxing Club, I went to Moyross Soccer Club in Limerick, and I went to Caritas College in Ballyfermot. And like being there was an under-16 girls basketball team, and it was kind of helping with self-harm, teenage pregnancy, all these things. We'll talk about, these kids shouldn't be using these phones, these kids should, but I do think there's a growing chunk of society that aren't part of that conversation and aren't getting access to that. And I think they're being forgotten about in Ireland.